Hello, all, and welcome to History with R&R Live. With me, as always, Jeff Franklin. How are we doing this afternoon?
We're doing well. How are you, Robert?
I'm not too bad, not too bad. So I'm just going to take a quick spin through chat before we bring up our guest. We have Old Media Guy. We have Mrs. Canuck. Welcome, my love. We have Mark Name Fully Tired. Archer Colin we have on the panel in chat, who's been on the panel once, which was awesome, and we're going to have back again. We have John DeMarco, we have Darth Haster, and Dadman Walking. Welcome, sir. Adega Outlaw, welcome. And I think that's it for now. So I want to say thank you to Jeff for orchestrating this. And without further ado, I shall bring up our guest, who is Dr. Alex. How are we doing?
Hello, doing well. As we said when we were warming up in the green room, I don't know why I'm here. I'm not a historian. I suspect I'm here simply as an example of living history.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think it's because, if I ever want to have Andy Trekker on, I have to have you on first, right?
What? Wait.
That makes sense to me.
I have to bring on somebody with knowledge first, so that Andy Trekker can kind of wing it afterwards.
Poor Andy Trekker.
I had to.
Now salty. You remember, he's now salty.
Well, yeah.
Salty
has experienced most of history anyway, so
yeah.
There you get there.
He's
Is that.
He's a little bit older than me. He's experienced more.
Yeah. Wasn't he throwing tea bags into a bay at some point?
I thought he was. Yeah.
All right. With all that banter aside, so Dr. Alex, I'll let you kind of start the topic, and we'll go from there.
What? You didn't say I was going to be doing that. You didn't warn me about any of this.
I'll let you take the lead here.
You
have the doctor
came
in
up
front of
with
your
this
name.
topic, so
Yeah, you have the doctor in front of your name.
In the green room, we were talking about people who present themselves as being historians and yet lack credentials. And this is a wide topic, because it's not just on YouTube, as you were saying, Robert.
Yeah.
But it's also in the media generally, on the History Channel and any number of other
that's
places
gotten bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the History Channel. It's the Pawn Stars channel. Give me a break.
Are you talking about Bethany Hughes again?
Pawn Stars, collecting cars, whatever. It does nothing to do with history half the time.
Yeah,
no, it doesn't.
Like rock song. But yeah, we were talking about that. So we could talk about what constitutes good source material if you're looking at history.
Well, that's easy. It's Wiki, isn't it? Everyone knows that. You just look up the Wiki.
I've got one physical prop with me, which
Google.
could start. Yeah? Do you want the physical prop?
Sure.
Okay, so this is a great example of what I'm talking about. This, you may be aware of it.
I think I've seen it a couple of times. Yeah.
Gavin Menzies, 1421. It's a few years old now, because it was given to me as I think it was a present, or someone recommended it, and I bought it. I actually bought it. Oh wow, 2002. So it's fairly old, but I read it. It's great. It's really interesting. But all the way through, in my mind, I knew, and he's upfront about it. He is not a professional historian. He's gathered a lot of interesting information about the potential that China basically discovered or went all around the world around 1421. And there are traces of their travel in the historical record, and their evidence of potentially colonization of bits of even North America. But all the way through, he's very clear that he is not a historian. And all the way through, I'm reading this and I'm going, this is fascinating. This is really interesting. But always but he's not a pro historian. He's not a pro academic. He hasn't necessarily done all the rigorous checking he needs to. Now, it's great that he's clear about that. I'm clear about that because I know how to read critically. But a lot of people, I wonder, just reading, so the Chinese did discover America, and that's the level it goes to. And that's as far as I go. And that's what we were talking about. The superficial acceptance of facts as they're presented in any media as being, well, that's it. It's written in stone. Boom, it must be true. Well, it clearly isn't written in stone. And just as clearly doesn't necessarily follow it's true. All right, I've spoken a lot. You take over.
Okay, so in that vein, I mean, if you look back, I mean, any war documentary whatever it is, whatever they're talking about. I'm going to nitpick the Italy campaign in World War II. The problem is it's written by either somebody with a national slant, so they will talk. If it's an American documentary, you will not hear about the British that were there or the Canadians that were there or anybody else. It's just, oh, the Americans fought in Italy and they won. Well, yeah, but the British and the Canadians and the French and the other people were there as well, but you don't hear about that. And the reason is it's written for a certain audience. It's written to, well, this is what we did, yay, yay, yay. You don't hear about Italy as much anymore because, well, unfortunately, they took Rome. The next day was D-Day, so they kind of got over Sean. Just to add.
Yeah.
So then it goes into the back burner.
That does remind me of something I watched on. I can bring my area into this. Big Bang Theory, where they were talking about they in an episode they were playing a war game, I think, and I think the war game was essentially reconstructing the Battle of Tobruk, and Sheldon, I think, says this isn't very well known about. This is a very small, minor battle. I'm thinking, no, it isn't. Tobruk is an incredibly well-known battle. It's one of the most important. It turned the tide of the war in North Africa actually, I think before the US even came into the war, if I'm right, or around the time.
They were just I think if memory serves, they were just getting involved.
Yeah,
they weren't there yet.
So it was way before. I mean, it was incredibly important. And I was also thinking, that's such an American-centric viewpoint. But also, I used to play a computer game when I was a kid on the Spectrum called Tobruk. It was one of the best computer games on the crappy Spectrum at the time. But yeah, we were driving tanks around the desert, blowing up German tanks in the desert. And there was a war film. There were lots of war films that were being rerun when I was a kid because they didn't bother to fill up the 3 or 4 channels we have with much. And yeah, I watched Tobruk, the 1950s or 60s war film about that very same battle. It was well known about, but maybe not from an American perspective.
Not from an American perspective, because it was before they got there. The other one, and the reason is because you're not going to, a lot of the African campaign gets dusted under the carpet because of Market Garden. Because the commander of the British troops, when things started going positive, was a general named Montgomery.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Montgomery had a stellar record in Africa. Unfortunately, his plan for Market Garden went south badly. Therefore, everything past that, he got more known for his failure in Market Garden than anything he ever did in Africa.
So what was Market Garden? Because you're going to have to fill in my...
Market Garden, cheap plug, History with R&R has a roundtable on it this Friday. Anyway.
Come to your stream this Friday.
Yeah. Market Garden was an attempt, because once the Western Front opens and D-Day happens, Eisenhower is majorly the king cheese. He's the boss.
Yeah.
Montgomery went from being national hero to the lead general to second fiddle to the American generals. Mm-hmm. So his pride made him want to do we'll end the war early. Yeah. So they planned a procedure that would basically have paratroopers and the tank corps working together to take several bridges.
Oh, a bridge too far.
A bridge too far.
Too far. You got
Market Garden.
I do know about it.
Yes.
Now you've told me about it. Yeah.
Yes. So because of its abysmal failure, Montgomery is more known for that abysmal failure than he is for, the tide turn that he did in Africa.
Yeah. Which is unfair, because this is right. His failure was right at the end of the war.
Yes.
He did do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So a bridge too far, which is what it was named afterwards, because basically the Arnhem Bridge. There was a whole bunch. I'm not going to spoil the video, but there was a lot of contributing factors that went into complete cluster F. Number one, they didn't tell the troops that 2 Panzer divisions were there. Minor details that and they didn't also notice that all the landing zones were flooded out by the Germans, which didn't help matters at all. And then it went tits up. And then poor Montgomery got, yes, he did well in Sicily as well. But like his build up to his campaign in the Western, in the Second Front, he was of great acclaim going in. The problem is his pride got to him because he didn't want to be second fiddle. He wanted to be the lead boss. So he figured that if this plan went through, then he'd be recognized as the man who ended the war early.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it didn't go that way. And then he ended up
prolonged it a little bit.
Yeah, he ended up playing second fiddle and wasn't heard from very much after that. After Market Garden, his credibility, everything was shot. So, and that's why the Africa campaign doesn't really start until Patton lands for some reason. Just saying. But yeah, so.
Yeah, like I was saying, most of my, apart from obviously watching, all we had were war films on TV being repeated from when I was not alive. But the other history I have from that period is Spike Milligan's war memoirs. What was it? Rommel, my part in his downfall. Montgomery, my part in his victory. Again, so I had a very positive idea of Montgomery because most of what I got was Spike Milligan's viewpoint of the African campaign, which was an incredible victory against better weaponry. I mean, what I know from the war film, because the film was pretty good, Tobruk as well. The German Panzer tanks were freaking awesome vehicles. They were terrifyingly
good. Panzer IVs.
And the British tanks were these crappy little things.
Oh, they had to put that into perspective. The British had Matilda 2s with a 2-pounder on it, and they had the Churchills, which were abysmal failures. Tank, but.
I do remember in the film was actually a really good film because you get these snippets of how they did certain things. So setting up their crappy little tanks downhill and uphill sections of battlefront. So when the Panzers came over, they could shoot up into their underside. It was like the only way they could get through that armor. Was
the only way they could get through the armor.
It was in exactly the right position. Go right out, bang!
Yeah,
but it wasn't doing a lot with a very crap set of resources. Seems to be a very British thing.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, the very British thing was the Firefly tank.
Right.
The Firefly tank was basically a Sherman, and they went, this gun is too weak, and they threw in a big gun that was too big for the turret, and then just went, screw it. But yeah.
What, did it work at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it worked. Like, it wasn't... the Americans end up upping the gun in the Sherman later on in the war.
Yeah.
But so they changed the turret, they change everything. Just the turret size, they upped the gun. But the British version made it very cramped. Yeah. And you couldn't carry as much ammo as the Allies would have liked, but it was a bigger gun.
Yeah.
So it was it's like customizing a car, shall we say, with just your blowtorch and a little bit of sheet metal.
It reminds me of a war I did actually live through. I was only a little kid at the time, and it was freaking scary when I saw it happening on TV because. When it first happened, it looked like that someone invaded the Scottish Islands, like the Hebrides or the Orkneys, and I was thinking, we're only like 100 miles away from there, or 200 miles. It was, of course, the Falkland invasion,
yes,
which was another example of a crappily resourced task force being sent to face certain things which were way out of their league. There were no supersonic jets in the task force. They only had the very old, even at the time, Sea Harriers. I mean, the Harrier came out in the late 60s, if I remember rightly, probably even earlier. But in the 60s, the Harriers came out, and they were fighting the top of the line. I can't remember if they were MiGs or if they were Saabs or what's the French ones? The French manufacturers.
I can't remember.
Damn it! Well, it's one of those top rank supersonic jets that they were fighting against. But by using their tactics very cleverly, so they would wait down low, wait for the jets to come in, and then send one up in front of them and one up behind. They would be able to fire their missiles. This is not meant to work, yet somehow they managed to take out enough to make it effective. But using it shouldn't really be lauded. We should be, if we're going into something, we probably have the right equipment. But
you should.
There's a lot of Brits using very crappy things when they shouldn't be, and getting more effect out than you'd expect. I've got another story I can tell you on that vein, but it may or may not be true. But it comes from an official source. But let's go back to what you talking about.
Gotta love those. The official sources sometimes fudge the books.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just a little bit. They cook the books. But the Falcons was interesting because it really, like, if you watch the documentaries of the people who were actually there, which I like to do, and them talk about it, when they were going in, it was, we'll be done by breakfast. This is a walk in the park. That's how they were sold. As many wars are. Don't worry, folks, you'll be back in time for dinner. And what they don't realize is, no, this is not going to be
how it works.
This isn't what we had hoped it would be. Oh shoot! But the Falcons was a messy little piece of business that kind of gets overshadowed now by other events and stuff like that. So,
indeed.
But and more to the vein of, just depending on what source you read. I mean, you could go into just the way the war ended. Depending on what source you read, Hitler died. Or, if you read other sources, he got away and lived his life out in Argentina. Whichever one you want to believe is up to you. But again, it depends on the book you read, right? It depends on who wrote it, why they wrote it, and what their biases were going in.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't usually take that into account. We see, we see any kind of credential in front of a name and we go, oh, well, they must know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Half the time they don't.
Very true.
Do you want me to repeat my rant from inside the green room?
Sure. It was a good one.
That was a good rant, was it? My rant from inside the green room was the only time I ever watch traditional TV now is when I go up to visit my mum, because she's obviously old and has a TV, whereas I do not. But she's often watching the History Channel or equivalents to the History Channel. Bethany Hughes was doing one of her documentaries on Socrates, and there was just so many things wrong with it. It was a relatively new one as well. It was by the BBC from the last 5 to 7 years, so up to date. But firstly, okay, let's just ignore the subject of Socrates for a second and how badly it was done. She is presented as historian Bethany Hughes. This is not something I would ever attribute to someone with that level of credentials. Her credentials are she has a bachelor's degree in history. And I was saying to you, when I dropped, I passed out in different ways, but I passed out of university barely with my degree, bachelor's degree in physics. I would not have called myself a physicist on the basis of that. Even when I got my master's many years later and did very well in that, I still wouldn't call myself a physicist because that's not a level high enough for me to say that's someone who works in physics yet. When I got my PhD much later, later again, it takes a while to get the PhD, and there's a little gap. Even now, I will call myself a physicist because it gets stupid now. It becomes false modesty. However, I still feel internally imposter syndrome, which is what you get when you're doing the PhD, and it doesn't end. Everyone who's thinking of doing a PhD, you'll still feel like an imposter even after you've got it. I still find it difficult to call myself that thing. The fact that she trots around on TV with her well-supported body is neither here nor there. She calls herself a historian, and other people call her a historian. She's not a historian. She did a bachelor's in history. She is no better qualified than most people out there, at least, working in any sort of media anyway.
Yeah. And we get that a lot. Like, well, I went to school for history. Oh, that's nice. What did you learn? Well, we learned that this happened and that happened. It's like, well, no. And then even like some of the new books that are coming out, it drives me nuts because they'll find something now that the Iron Curtain has fallen. Take Russia, for example.
Yeah.
And they'll find something that some Russian soldier wrote in 45 and that was being passed up the chain. So obviously Stalin's going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's glowing like, oh, we were doing so good and a great job and blah, 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 blah. They're doing that because if they don't and Stalin reads this thing, you're going to go to a hooskow. Right? So,
they're taking this as an honest, straight report without any nuance
bias.
Or gloss to it.
Yeah. And it's like, no, like some of the modern historian books now paint Stalin. I look at the way they report things now and write about things. And I go, Stalin would have given his left leg to have publicists of this caliber when he was alive. He would have just loved these people, and they probably would have had a condo in Moscow and armed guard because the repainting of actions he took is just astounding. Like for most of my youth, if you talked about the purge in Russia before World War II, it was looked upon as a negative that Stalin got rid of anybody who could, question him or challenge him militarily. He got rid of them. They were either executed or they were sent to the Gulag. And the modern spin is he got rid of all the old people holding back the Russian military and put in the youth. That's the modern spin. The traditional way of looking at it was he made a stupid error and got rid of all the people that knew what they were doing, and that's why they got their asses kicked for the first bit of 42. But the modern spin is, it was a great idea. It was a great thing. It's unfortunate that people had to die, but it was a great idea.
Yeah.
Which is just mind-blowing.
It reminds me of somewhere I used to work where something very similar happened. I'd never thought of my boss as being Stalin, but now I do.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. But yeah, because Stalin was a paranoid he was paranoid because his power came from a coup, right? So he's always looking for the next one, and the military had to be weakened and kept with yes men, and if he didn't get yes men, they had to go away because they could lead a revolution against him. So he was always in a position of, no, you're getting too much popularity, you got to go. And nowadays they look at it like, that was the greatest thing he could have done for the Russian military. And it's like, what are you smoking? And can I have some?
Yeah.
It's just
what's going on with people's critical thinking skills? I mean, that's the real problem here. It's not just
absolutely
your discipline and your love of history. Every discipline potentially, but perhaps more obviously visible to most people are the human sciences and human not the human side. The human sciences, yes, but also the arts. Okay, history, I guess, comes into the arts, doesn't it? I always hate categorizing these things because it feels more like it should be towards science, like you're examining stuff, but it's always classed as an art. But yeah, the critical thinking aspects there appear to be getting very weak. And I guess it's most obvious because most people working in the media are from an arts background. And when they get weak, everyone sees it. Well, everyone who still has critical thinking ability.
Yeah, anybody who can decide that water is wet without somebody telling them, then like for instance, the Barbarossa, which is the attack of Russia in World War II, is looked upon as the stupidest damn thing that Germany could have done. However, we're looking at this in the wrong way. We're looking at this from armchair quarterback, which is after the game has been played and we know what happens. If you look at it from the actual time, there were some actual benefits to Barbarossa. If Barbarossa had gone to plan, Germany knew that the United States would not be able to get into the war, and they probably wouldn't be able to open up a second front until at least 44. Because they need time to build up. They need time to yada, 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 build up the military. So they were free to go up until 44. Late 43, early 44. So Barbarossa happens in 42. If they had been able to take out Russia before the end of 43, which was the plan, that would have allowed them to have the oil that they would need and the supplies that they would need to fight against the United States, Britain, and France.
Yeah.
However, it didn't go to plan. So it is now seen as one of the worst mistakes ever known to man. The other one in World War II that is looked at in the wrong vein now is Dalfi, or Hitler, declaring war on the United States after Pearl Harbor. If you are sitting from his position at the time, it is not the dumbest thing in the world. For one, the American military is not ready to attack him at the time. Yeah. They're still making rookie mistakes by keeping their ports lit up like the 4th of July instead of turning out the lights because, submarines are a thing. And so from his perspective, they're not ready to fight him. And if he can take care of Russia and get them off the map before the Americans are ready to come into the war, he stands to gain a great amount. And at the time, Germany was outproducing the United States in all aspects. Because before World War II, Roosevelt had led a major campaign against anything military, anything, all of that. There were tariffs put on military production. There was red tape and bullshit put on anything like that. I mean, the United States enters World War II with their soldiers having to walk around with broomsticks because they didn't have guns to put in their arms during practice. The Marines had to practice tanks with trucks with tank written on the side of the suckers because they didn't have the tanks for the practice.
Yeah.
The United States submarine force, they end up crippled for the first bit of World War II because the Mark 14 torpedo is a piece of garbage, but it was never tested because they didn't have enough for testing. So again, it's how we look at things now as armchair quarterbacks going, well, that was stupid. Yeah, it ended up being stupid. But at the time, when you're making the decision, the information that was given to him at the time, he knew it was going to be 2 years, at least, before they were a threat. So it's a very interesting thing. But nowadays, it's always, well, this is what actually happened. So with retrospect, this was a stupid decision. Yeah, but you got to put that in, because you can't just call it a stupid decision, because they're only going on the information they have at the time. They don't have that favored crystal ball to be able to go, oh, this is going to end badly. They can only go with the information they're given at the time. And sometimes they don't even do that, which is annoying. And I mean, if you look at the first year of World War II with the United States on board, it went badly. The Atlantic was a joke, because you had Admiral King, who did a lot of good things. However, at the beginning of the war, the beginning of the war for the United States, basically he was like, what's this? Convoys? Nah, we don't have to waste our time on that. The Brits don't know what they're talking about. They've only been in the war for a couple of years, dumbass. So they weren't sending.
That's how you really think.
They weren't sending the tankers with convoy escort. So they got sunk. And then he refused to shut down New York Harbor, turn out the lights. So they had all the lights on in the harbor, which silhouettes all the ships in harbor. So they just, it's like a turkey shoot.
The Japanese or the Germans who actually torpedoing on that side?
That was the Germans.
Yeah, it would be the Germans by that point on that side.
Yeah, it was the Germans. Actually, to be honest, and this is something you don't hear about a lot, the Kriegsmarine had been sinking ships off the coast of the United States long before Pearl Harbor. They tried not to, because, they didn't want to have the United States join the war as long as humanly possible. But, there was ships that accidentally went to the bottom of the Atlantic.
Because that was, of course, how the US got brought in the First World War.
Yes. Although many people think it was the Lusitania, but really the Lusitania was just a battle cry and turned into a publicity fiasco. But the United States didn't enter World War II or World War I till about a year after the Lusitania. The other thing that a lot of people don't understand is this same ploy was played by the British twice, once in World War I and once in World War II. And that was, in World War I, it was an actual thing. In World War II, it was fabricated and absolute bullshit, but it was still sold to the United States with a bill of goods by Mr. Churchill, which was that they were going to supply arms to Mexico to invade. And it played out in World War I. It was one of the major reasons for Wilson declaring war on the Axis, because it got leaked of a plan made by the Kaiser at the time to support Mexico in retaking the lands lost to the United States. And then flash forward to World War II, and the British just outright fabricated a communique and dropped it into Roosevelt's hands. And it's later come out that it was all a bunch of bullshit, but it got the result wanted, the United States in the war. But it was a fabricated communique that the Germans were going to come up through Mexico.
Yeah, I've heard other things. I mean, it doesn't surprise me if that's true. I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that Churchill had got some wind of Pearl Harbor before it actually happened. And
that's a contested. Well, technically they did. Yeah. It's shown that the British picked up the fleet.
Really, I didn't know that.
And they tried to send. They shared that information. The problem with Pearl Harbor is they were convinced the attack would come to I think it was Midway first.
Mm.
It ended up being the other way around.
Yeah.
But Pearl was seen as, well, why would you attack Pearl? Pearl's got, all the battleships, everything else. You're not going to attack Pearl. That's stupidity. Pearl is untouchable.
Mm.
It's a undefeatable fortress. You're not getting into Pearl. Midway, maybe. Another thing they were thinking was Wake Island would be the first one to get knocked out. Unfortunately, what happened at Wake, I'm going to do a show on. But it is one of the biggest travesties of World War II, and there is a admiral that took over after Pearl Harbor that needs to be expunged from history because he's a jackass. He left a whole bunch of Marines out to dry, and it's not talked about a lot. But basically, the Wake Island was under attack by the Japanese, and there was just a small garrison. I mean, at this point, civilians were handed machine guns and told, hey, guess what? And they repelled the first attack. Amazingly. They had no naval support, and they took out 2 destroyers from the land.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And so they survived the first wave. And the second wave comes in, and it was a race. They pushed through. They had aircraft carriers, destroyers, more Marines, and they decided that, okay, we're going to stop here and fuel. So they were fueling up the fleet, the rescue fleet. The Japanese got there first, and they started bombing. And the commander in charge on Wake Island sent out a message. Does not look good. We don't know how long we can hold out. The admiral in charge took that as Wake has fallen, and he turned the armada around, leaving them high and dry. They were within 12 hours of making it to Wake, and the American admiral went, I'm not risking my carriers. Turn them around. And so a whole bunch of American Marines were taken into captivity by the Japanese a day later. And Wake fell. Now, the sad part about that is Wake falling and the admiral turning the boats around never made public knowledge until after World War II, because the first rappel of the Japanese hit the newspapers back home to the point where they were selling war bonds on the fact that they had struck back. There were movies made about it, glorifying and making them out to be these great American soldiers. They just neglected to mention that the American Navy decided, nah, you're expendable. I'm not risking my carriers. Deal with it. And they turned him around last minute. He never had a command after that. Just throwing that up there. But yeah, so it was, and again,
good reason.
Yeah. So he basically left those Marines to die because they were expendable. His carriers weren't.
Indeed.
But they don't. Again, it's not a majorly talked about aspect because it makes.
But this is history. I mean, uncovering or information in recent history in the wars being secret or suppressed for various political or morale reasons. That's known about. That's what history is all about. Uncovering the truth based on the evidence. What we're seeing is the truth, or at least the evidence is there. and people have known about it in academia, and yet people are presenting things in complete variance or utterly untrue stuff. If I can go back to the thing that pissed me off earlier, Bettany Hughes' documentary on
Please.
Socrates. This is because I'm not an expert in this either, but I have read this at least. I've read all of Plato's works on. Well, that would be all Plato's works because there isn't a single one that hasn't got Socrates in it somewhere. And I've read Xenophon. And these are the only two written sources we really have for Socrates. And there is no written Socrates because he did not write stuff down. He did not like writing. He didn't see the need in it. And even Plato was a bit. He did write stuff down, but he was very suspicious. He was suspicious about his own treatises, his own writings, documents, articles on philosophy, books. Let's call them books. Books on philosophy. He was suspicious of that. He would say as a warning, this is not philosophy. Philosophy is the living discourse, the discussion between people. That is philosophy. This is just a simulation. I'm paraphrasing because he didn't use exactly these words, but he didn't review his own written works as true philosophy. But they're the only recordings we have of what might be Socrates, but they're not Socrates. They are Plato writing with Socrates as a character. Bits of it may have been lifted from his actual dialogue, but we don't know what's him and what's Plato. Yet, all the through this documentary, Bettany Hughes is quoting Socrates, and they are chunks of Plato and occasionally chunks of Xenophon. There is nothing there that you could say, this is Socrates saying this is Socrates' wisdom. This is just as likely to be, this is Plato's wisdom.
Yeah.
A lot of his would have been gleaned from his being a student, if you like, under Socrates. But you can't separate the two, and you definitely can't attribute these things to Socrates. Particularly, okay, now it's reminded me, the thing that really pissed me off is that she used the defense of Socrates, one of the most famous Plato works about Socrates and his life, as saying this was his defense he gave in his trial before he was convicted of sedition and made to poison himself. No, he did not give a defense. That is why Plato wrote the defense, because he wished he had. He decided not to. He said, right, the people must decide what they want to do with me. And that was essentially Socrates' entire defense. Plato wrote the defenses. This is what he should have said, because this is what an awesome dude he was, and this is how he should have defended himself. But it was no more the words of Socrates than anything else Plato's written. And in this particular example, it clearly wasn't, because he only wrote it because he said nothing.
Yeah.
And it was presented as fact in this documentary. As I talk more about this, it reminds me of more and more of the intellectual dishonesty and utter paucity of content, of intellectual content in this documentary. This documentary is actually course material for the history, either history or philosophy. I think it's history, actually. The history degree, undergraduate degree, for the Open University in this country. This was one of their course materials. So it wasn't just, it's just the public. It's just fine. We'll just throw this out there, and Joe Bloggs mashing his face into his fish and chips won't give a crap. That's not the point. This is a university course material you're using. Yeah. This is utter crap. I mean, Jesus Christ. No wonder the standard of critical discourse and the standard of critical thinking has gone into the toilet, because you're feeding the students who are meant to be learning how to think utter bollocks.
Well, yes. And the other thing, too, I mean, if you really want to get technical, look at how many World War II documentaries there are about when the Allies screwed the pooch.
Yeah.
Compared to the Allies winning. Right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
There's a certain slant that we want out there. And if you were to go, well, yes, but like a good example is D-Day compared to Dieppe. Dieppe and D-Day happened in World War II. Problem was Dieppe was an utter fucking failure.
Yeah.
D-Day was a success. You will hear more about D-Day than you ever will about Dieppe. And when they do talk about Dieppe, Dieppe is the learning curve so that D-Day would be successful.
Right.
The lessons learned in Dieppe helped us achieve D-Day. And That's a nice spin, mother trucker, but that isn't what happened.
What did Gallipoli teach us? Not to do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Another
Yeah.
failed monstrosity of an attack. Yeah, World War One, the Gallipoli campaign. The poor Australians. Well, it was their battle of fire. Yeah, it was their battle of fire. All right. It was a
Wasn't there
walking,
an
talking
almost
travesty.
Sorry. Wasn't there an almost identical cock-up, though, in World War II involving the Allies going into Turkey?
Yes.
Which one was that?
Um.
Not Anzac. Is it?
It was the original invasion of Italy.
Right, okay.
Because even a German, it was said by a German commander once, the next time you want to invade Italy, try invading it from the north first.
Uh-huh.
Because what happened was they attacked in the south and went north. The problem with that is northern Italy is mountains.
Yeah.
So you went from flatland to mountains
Mm.
where everything got bogged down
Yes.
and it turned into a slog.
Mm.
Whereas if they had gone in through the north first and down,
Yeah.
you get rid of the hard bit first and then it would have been
True.
easy to
There's
coast.
You just reminded me there's another reason they should have gone in the north as well, because that was actually where the partisans were in the highest concentration as well.
Yes.
They actually would have had some support coming in through Tuscany, for example. And
Yeah.
there were a lot communists, but then you were fighting with the Russians on your side. You weren't going to be that fussy about it. There were a lot more partisans in the north end fighting their own country. Yeah, it would have made a lot more sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah. Yeah. So you end up with this brilliant plan to attack Italy. The problem is you went in at the softest point, not realizing, okay, this is going to get harder as we go.
Mm.
It was, well, once we it was the same mentality as Barbarossa. Well, once we kick in the door, everything will just fall apart.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, no, you still had the Italian Navy and you had, some other minor things you had to deal with, but no big deal. But yeah, history is full of, well, this is how it's reported, but like a good example, the modern day look back at D-Day. If the biggest argument coming out of D-Day, if you ask a ground troop about the bombing raids that happened on D-Day, especially in Utah Beach, the ground forces will tell you, if you talk to a person who was there, they will tell you, I don't know where they were bombing other than a whole bunch of poor, helpless, defenseless cows, but they didn't hit a single German outpost. If you talk to a bomber from the bombing crew, they hit every target on D-Day, and they hit it well. So depending on which side you hear it from, you will have two different variations of that same story.
Yeah.
You will have from the ground troops, they didn't hit a damn thing except for cows that day. And if you talk to the bombing group, they hit all of their targets and they hit them well.
Yeah.
I think that's true with any situation. You're going to get different perspective from different people.
But I think the problem is that people are forgetting that is the truth, that there are different perspectives. And
You're right.
There's a double-edged problem here. I mean, one is that they're not even thinking about, well, have I got all the information? That's the key. Have I got all the information I could get on this situation from as many viewpoints as possible? There is, of course, the other downside of that is where people then go, oh, well, they're all these viewpoints. They're equally worthless, and we can know nothing, which is kind of naive relativism is the sort of buzzword name for it.
The other thing that's really scary in the modern historian world, and I shake my head at most of them, but and I'm not even a historian. I just like history. I've read as much as I can, watched as much as I can, and I'm an armchair quarterback at best.
As we all
right. Yeah. So, but the part that really troubles me is I would rather sit there and watch an hour documentary of veterans talking about, well, when we landed on D-Day, this is what happened and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
As opposed to some jackass who wasn't even born yet standing there going, this is what happened and this was the troops and blah, 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 blah. Because the modern historian discredits people that were there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they were there, but they don't really know what was going on. We do. That is the mentality.
I know.
People who were there don't know what the hell they're talking about. We do. And that is a scary, scary outlook.
That mentality, coupled with the fact that often we've just discussed this, they themselves haven't got the academic chops to back it up either, is doubly scary. It's like, how did you get such certainty off the basis of so little?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this book told me, well, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like the modern mantra in the historical world is, yes, it is good to listen to our veterans, but do take what they say with a grain of salt because they didn't have the big picture we do. That's the mentality.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely shameful because those men and women were there.
Yeah.
They were boots on the ground.
How much of the big picture do you have? How many different sources do you have for your big picture? How do these various sources tally with each other? This is what history is, or academic historians should be. They are looking at multiple sources, weighing up the validity, looking at the possible, as you say, biases and skews upon it. This would be a real historian talking about, and actually any academic talking about their subject. And I'd say as a physicist, you would couch your things in less than concrete terms. You would litter your language with the amounts of uncertainty in your measurements. This is very physical. I'm going around it. Yeah. You talk about the uncertainty in the things you're trying to deal with. You're saying this could happen, but only within these parameters, only with these bounds, only if this is true and this is true. This is a physicist talking about physics. Historians used to and should do the same things. On the basis of the evidence, it seems likely that this was what was happening. However, there are this and this and this that would seem to put some doubt on this. You should have doubt with the certainty. I mean, if you're truly strongly, but this is the potential caveats I'm going to throw in there that maybe there's some doubt here. That is a proper history documentary.
Yes.
This doesn't seem to be what they're doing now.
No. And nowadays it's more the person presenting has to present in a way that they are the great Pumbaa. They know what's going on. They are well studied. They know what they're talking about. And anybody who challenges said argument is a conspiracy theorist, a quack, or needs to go back and read another book. Because I said that Churchill was an idiot, I'm right. Right? and unfortunately, Churchill is a wonderful point to point to, because depending on which Churchill you're talking about, that statement is 100% correct.
Yeah.
If you are talking about Gallipoli, he jumped the shark on that one.
Yeah.
However, if you're talking about Prime Minister Winston Churchill, well, you missed the boat.
Yeah.
Right? So depending on when you're talking about, you can find arguments for both sides. Winston Churchill was an amazing strategist and great man. You can also find argument for Winston Churchill was an idiot.
Yeah.
And an egotist. Right? You can find arguments within the documentation that is factual for either argument.
Of course, the amazing thing is that he was both, as we all are, because we're all wonderful and flawed beings. And that's pretty much, you can well, some people have less of the wonderful, and we'll come back to that at some other point maybe. But he did some very stupid things. And as we said in the green room, the one thing that kind of lifts him a little bit above the level of politicians today, because I cannot think of an example that would be anywhere near this, he was aware of his own mistakes. And in the First World War, after Gallipoli, he resigned his office and joined the ranks. He went to fight in the First World War. And I can't think of a single damn politician post
No.
Second World War who would ever do that.
No, who would put his money where his mouth is?
No.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
Churchill wasn't
and
idiot,
Churchill was
but-
in World War One. As much flack as he got for Gallipoli,
yeah,
he did. He went, okay, I screwed up. I'm not only am I stepping down, but I want rank, and I'm going into the battle.
yeah,
I'm going to the front line,
unheard of today.
and that would not happen today. And
No.
just quickly. Thank you, my dear, and try not to work too hard and don't let them annoy you too much. I know that's hard, but just don't throw anything at them. And make sure you're muted when you say they're idiots. But no, like modern, and unfortunately, there's no room for discourse. That's the biggest thing I think that have been taken away is there's no room for discourse.
You've reminded me of something. Slight plug of something on my channel. I did a video of when the BBC became worthless, and the reason I bring it up now is because it directly goes into what we're talking about the way it was predominantly science, but also history is presented in documentaries on the BBC. Because there was a series, you probably know of it actually. It's called Horizon, or it's still running, but it is called Horizon on BBC. And it was predominantly science.
I've seen Horizon.
Yeah, but it did have some historical stuff. That's the pyramids of Caral, I think it was in South America, stuff to do with the Egyptians. I mean, they had lots of historical, archaeological stuff in there as well, which is awesome. But all of their documentaries were faceless. They had narrators filling in the gaps between actual scientists and archaeologists and historians talking about whatever subject it was, discussing the theme of the actual the show itself. I'm being very general here, but they were brilliant. There was a lot of discourse. There was a lot of back and forth until they got the narrative across they wanted to and got to the point they wanted to. But it wasn't. This is the way things are. It was like, here's a journey through what we know, and here's where we kind of are. And there was even the uncertainties at the end presented well, up until about 2012. Now, I used to work in education back then. I guess I've worked in education all the way through my life at various different forms. But I was using these documentaries up to 2011, 2012 with the kids in an after-school club. It was called the Science Cinema Club, and it did have some archaeology too, which is a science, which has some history in it too. But we would just watch any one of these and then discuss it afterwards. And that, the documentaries were of such a good, rigorous near academic quality and had so many questions that you could ask. They were a beautiful teaching tool. In 2012, I couldn't use them. I couldn't use any new ones. I could use all the old ones before it, up to 2011, but 2012 fell off a cliff. It was remarkable. Suddenly there was a talking head in every one. There was somebody who had to present the actual documentary, who may or may not have been a scientist. I'm reminded of Brian Cox in Wonders of the Solar System. Now, he is a scientist. I would like to quickly add he's not a freaking astrophysicist. But anyway, that's not so. But they had even more distant people presenting these things that were further and further from the thing being discussed. And who cares? Get this guy's face off. Give me the content. Give me the words. Give me the actual story of what's happening. Not this guy with the wind blowing his hair romantically, standing in front of whatever. No. Give me the people doing the work. Show me the history of the discoveries. Do that. It was just, was when I said the BBC became worthless. I've spoilt my own video, but you should go away and watch it because it's awesome.
Yes,
so
and Dr. Alex's
recommend
channel
that
is
video.
in the description of this video, of this live stream. So
awesome.
Do go and
you did that excellently.
Thank you. You'll have to dig it out of Educating Rita is the playlist, and it's somewhere down that playlist near the bottom. And it's when the BBC became worthless. It's earlier than you think. 2012. It's a really sharp cutoff, and the news output I also talk about that, and that became crappy back in the early 90s. But it was still Horizon carried it in terms of having worth in my own mind up until that point. But then they couldn't make decent educational. They've lost the ability to do news. Now they can't do education. Well, you might do a couple of fiction. My brain is really tired today. You might be able to do fiction and have some credentials there. Although I think after
Doctor Who,
2017,
forget
at the end
that.
of Doctor Who, nah, you can't even do that. Clearly, you
Yeah.
have no worth.
You were being kind. You were being kind for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, a little bit. But I think 2012 was actually when it fell off a cliff. There's nothing really worthwhile now coming out of the BBC. So it's been
Yeah. Well,
crappy for
and the
longer.
other thing too, I mean, if you look at Egypt and how they talk about the pyramids,
Yeah.
it is hilarious every time I look at a modern documentary that comes out, and they talk about how they were built by slaves. They were built by slaves. The problem with that is if you go to the archaeological side and you look at it, that has been disproven since the early 90s.
Yeah, because they did have dedicated cities.
They had
towns,
dedicated workforce.
Yeah.
They had every one of these pyramids has this huge city built around it. Huge.
Yeah.
And there are signs of commerce. There are
Yes.
signs of, if you go to the actual archaeological side of the pyramids, it tells a completely different story
There's
than
a lot of
the narrative.
There's a lot of nuance buried in there that's being covered up. I mean, how much is anyone living in any city in ancient Egypt not a slave? Because you're really under the thumb of the
You're under the thumb of the Egyptians for sure.
But yeah, they also probably did invite in and import worker communities to fill these places to build them. Yeah, you can call them slaves too, in the same way that there are lots of indentured workers.
Well,
in
if you
Saudi
look at
Arabia
modern
right now
day,
who've got really crappy,
if you look at
really crappy conditions.
modern day, you've got really
not
crappy
technically
jobs. You still got to
slaves.
do them.
Yeah,
right?
But they bloody well are de facto. But yeah, that calling them slaves straight is covering a lot of grey areas and a lot of the intricacies of the society at the time.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I mean, you got to realize they had skilled craftsmen.
Yeah, exactly. This is where
that were taught by
these were
their father
communities,
and their father before them, and they were skilled craftsmen building the pyramid.
Yeah.
It wasn't Joe Blow off the street building the pyramid. They were doing the manual labor. Well, look at modern day. You have your skilled people at the top, and then you have your general purpose worker underneath.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean,
we still work that way today.
Yeah, society was harsh then. No one's going to deny that.
No.
Society's been harsh right up until pretty much the 19th century, and for a lot of that too. But yeah, that it's. I imagine you're right that a lot of people living and working on the pyramids would not have called themselves slaves because they didn't have that official designation.
No, their
were life might not be
skilled workers. Working
might have
in
been that
their
much
trade.
separated in the way that their lives were.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But that's not the way the narrative runs.
No.
So it doesn't fit the narrative, so it doesn't get added, which is, I think, a disservice. Because the other thing that is stupid within modern history is we're applying modern day values and modern day ways of looking at things to historical events.
Yeah.
This shit don't apply. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. You can't apply a modern viewpoint. And if you are applying a modern viewpoint, it would be, this was acceptable at the time, but under a modern scope, this couldn't happen today. That is fair.
Gone. Yeah,
that's a fair premise.
Rights would be an utterly unknown foreign concept to someone living of the time period of ancient Egypt, not just in Egypt, but the entire human world at that time. Talking about somebody's rights would be meaningless. What do you mean rights? You mean, I've got to do this. This is what I have to do. Duties, yeah. They would have some concept of duties. I must do this, but normally for very practical reasons, in order for my family not to die, in order for me to not die. But I have duties to do things for my survival. But the concept of rights, that was you have to get into the Enlightenment really to really start talking about that.
Yeah.
maybe Renaissance, but definitely Enlightenment.
And then
is where that
if you
kicks
really
in.
break down these rights that everybody banters about, in my
Hmm.
opinion, and I stress my opinion, they're nothing more than privileges anyway. Because a
Well, that's
right is not a right as long as it can be taken away by the stroke of a pen. If it can
I
be
think
taken
that's
away
what-
with a stroke of a pen, this
Yeah.
is a privilege.
Yeah. I think that's how an ancient. If you did go to the trouble of trying to explain what a right was to an ancient Egyptian, and finally got them to get some conception of what you're talking about, you say, "Well, you sound like a spoilt person," or
Yes.
something to those lines, or what you believe you should naturally get that thing.
Yeah.
But nature doesn't give me that. Nature gives
Yeah.
me death, and occasionally,
Yeah, the natural guarantee, the only guarantee in life is that it will come to an end at some point.
right.
That is the
Very
natural guarantee. The rest is bonus. Just throwing that out there. But
I'm very glad we live now.
yes, absolutely. So I want to thank you for joining us. I'm going to let you promote your channel, promote anything you're doing, and then we'll wrap this up.
Oh, all right then.
If I must, right?
Okay, so I just happen to have these 3 books to hand, which are very useful.
Just
get
happen.
mine closer to the camera. I will
Make
show them
his
in order of
picture big.
publication. Say what?
Robert.
Oh
you're
yeah,
big,
yeah.
sorry.
I will
Yeah.
get that.
Make
done
him
right
big.
now.
In big.
There you go.
Right, there we go. So I can try and do everything as quickly as possible, so I don't hog too much time. Here is available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardback form. The Doctor Season 12, which is essentially an alternative to the Doctor Who Season 12, pumped out by the BBC under Chimble, and which is of course a pile of crap. Whereas this is enjoyable. I know it sounds so immodest to say this about your own work, but I have evidence. People have told me they've enjoyed it. Therefore, I'm saying it's enjoyable. So this was season 12. It's on YouTube for free. There are all 12 chapters in here as 12 episodes of The Doctor season 12. That playlist is the first on my channel under the playlist section. It's not hard to find. The featured video is the final chapter in this, the final episode. So if you don't want spoilers, don't watch the featured video. Go to the first one in the playlist because that's chapter 1. There you go. The Doctor season 12, a retelling of Doctor Who, but good without the crap that Chimble did. And as you can probably tell, it's pretty much the 12th Doctor continuing, the Peter Capaldi Doctor, with a little bit of a twist at the beginning to explain how the 12th Doctor is continuing and what happened with the god-awful Chimble era. The season 11-12 is dealt with in here. Don't worry. It's not like I ignored it. It was just elegantly explained. And after that... but before it, in a way, the other book after it is The Doctor Regenerations Past, which is actually on another playlist just simply called The Doctor. And it's the early works I did writing for Big Finish and other publications, and a few unrelated works that never got published. So my early works are in here. They are, some of them, actual Doctor Who, in that they were paid for by Big Finish and they were under license and to the BBC, and they are copyright me. Therefore, I should have every right to publish them. No one's jumped on me yet anyway. But yeah, there's old stuff there. And now it's not out. Well, the book is out. Okay, let's do this properly. This book, trying to get my fingers out of the way. This is The Doctor Season 13, unless I picked up the wrong one. No, this is The Doctor Season 13, which is going to replace, and has already replaced essentially because it's available on Kindle, paperback and hardback on Amazon. This is the upcoming Doctor Who Season 13 alternative. So if you don't like Chimble and his utter crap, you can do a spoiler and do a Netflix, binge watch by reading the book. But you can wait until, now we know, Halloween, when episode 1 of The Doctor Season 13 is ready to go. The episode 1 of The Doctor Season 13 will go out at exactly the same time, possibly a little bit before, depending on how they do their timings. The BBC's dropping their load of uncontrolled effluent on us. So yeah, that's The Doctor Season 13, already available on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, hardback, and will very soon, end of this month, be available on YouTube for free, just like these two are free on YouTube as well. So get as much free stuff as you can, because I love people watching me read. And I think that's all I can say.
All right, perfect. And I just threw Dr. Alex's channel in the chat. So if you are not subscribed, please go and
Can
go
I say
ahead.
one more thing?
Yep.
I have to say this because I could not do this without my editor and fellow actress and guest star. Eon is her YouTube name, as will be. And she, if you want to see her, she plays one character in particular all the way through all of these, but several other characters as well. And I play, as well as reading it and playing the Doctor as the Doctor, dressed like the Doctor, I also do other characters as well. So, but Eon, I had to say that because I would not be able to do this. I would never have done this without her.
Awesome. And
I also
but
put a link in the chat for when the BBC became worthless.
yes,
So check
thank you.
that out.
Brilliant. Thank you.
But definitely go check out Dr. Alex's channel if you like his stuff. Please do subscribe, share it out, get him some
Excellent
get him some
content.
views and some likes on the videos. And I just want to thank you for sticking with us, crazy people, for an hour and 11 minutes without going completely mad. So thank you very much. And to everyone in chat, thank you for joining. I hope that this was informative and it was a good discussion. It'll maybe cause some more discussion. That's what I think is missing from a lot of this is actual discussion, whether you're right, wrong, or indifferent. I think everybody should be allowed to say, well, this is what I thought of this, and not have to go, well, you're wrong, shut up, which is modern discourse, unfortunately. So, so I want to thank our guest. Thank you very much. It was an honor to have you on, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Alex.
you. Thank you, really.
And as always, thank you, Jeff. And thank you to everyone in
pleasure.
chat. And until next time, take her easy. And thank you and good night.